Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery Roger, go for deploy.
And everybody in the shuttle program, the crew is go for launch.
I did. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
You're watching live coverage of the NASA SpaceX Crew-6 mission as they return to Earth. Dragon Endeavour departed the International Space Station at 4:05 a.m. Pacific time earlier this morning. On board Crew-6 are NASA's Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoburg, United Arab Emirates astronaut Sultan Alneyadi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Currently, they're on their way to the targeted splashdown site off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. My name is Kate Tice, Senior Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Gary Jordan.
Hey, great to be here, Kate. This is an awesome day for splashdown. So upon departing the station, Dragon underwent a sequence of departure burns. The crew had a rest period and has since kicked off preparations for re-entry, including getting in their launch and re-entry suits and successfully performing a leak check. The next phase of the mission is when these things really ramp up. Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Crew-6 home.
First, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the spacecraft. The trunk is currently connected to the aft or the bottom section of the Dragon capsule where the heat shield is located. So, in order to expose the heat shield and get the vehicle ready for atmospheric entry, we'll jettison that trunk.
And from there, the spacecraft will use its forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to Earth. This burn will last 16 minutes once it starts. The deorbit burn uses Draco thrusters on Dragon, primarily the four located on the forward bulkhead, and is executed at the apogee or the highest point of Dragon's current orbit around the Earth. This will alter Dragon's path to ultimately line it up to re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
As you can see from that graphic there on your screen, it should be pretty visible, especially if you are in Florida. So head outside and take a look up. It's an incredible sight, especially for these nighttime splashdowns. But before we go any further, let's take a minute to meet our crew.
That's right. On board, starting with our captain, is Steve Bowen, who hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts, and is married with 3 children. He holds the title of the first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Bowen is also a veteran of 3 previous NASA space flights, including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the International Space Station, delivered an integrated cargo carrier, and a Russian mini-research module. With this mission, he now has logged 227 days in space, including 65 hours and 57 minutes in 10 spacewalks. Today, he is the commander of Crew-6.
Sitting next to
Dragon SpaceX, preemptively, we are 11 minutes out from deorbit sequence start and expect to be LOS during class Sept prep.
Expect to be LOS during class Sept prep.
All right, those comms from SpaceX Core to Dragon Endeavour, just letting the crew know that we will have a loss of signal while we are performing the claw separation, which we mentioned that earlier is one of the steps for deorbit, but that deorbit burn coming up soon. Now, getting back to the crew on board, sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from University of California, Berkeley. During grad school, Hoburg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. Crew-6 has been Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. As pilot for Crew-6, he is responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Aboard the station, he served as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer and is coming home with 186 days in space and 11 hours, 38 minutes of time outside the hatch on 2 spacewalks.
In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be a part of Expedition 68 and 69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi, but in 2020 traded that in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This has been his first trip to space, so he also now has 186 days in orbit. Additionally, he went on 1 spacewalk totaling 7 hours and 1 minute.
It was also the first trip to space for the second mission specialist, Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Andrey was selected as a cosmonaut back in 2012. He will monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic re-entry phase of flight. While on board station, he served as a flight engineer for Expeditions 68 and 69 and returns today also with 106 80 days in space. Now, to prepare for upcoming events, the Dragon spacecraft is currently doing a couple of things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very temperate for Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey during the re-entry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk.
And that trunk separation, the Dragon has to orient itself such that it positions the trunk so that it doesn't have any risk of recontact with the spacecraft. Of course, we want that to also deorbit in the Earth's atmosphere, limit the orbital debris, so that will, the trunk itself will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. It allows Dragon and exposes what are the picatiles. This is really the heat shield on Dragon. And so after that trunk separation, Dragon will reorient itself with the heat shields pointed right in the right direction to allow Dragon to go through the entry interface. We'll see a couple of things in rapid succession at that point. Really, at the time of the deorbit burn, that's that 16-minute burn we were discussing before, and that is a retrograde firing primarily of those forward bulkhead thrusters that slow the spacecraft down significantly, not as quite as significantly as entry, but enough to really make contact with some of the upper limits of the atmosphere and start with the drag and plasma buildup that gets the spacecraft from 17,000 miles an hour to about 350 after it passes through the atmosphere. And that's about a 7-minute period. We'll have a loss of signal at that time. It's a blackout period, which we track. The plasma buildup just allows very limited comms to go through. So we'll be really just waiting for the back end of that 7-minute period until we start getting communications and data from the spacecraft.
Yeah, that heat shield will be doing so much work during that reentry phase. The external temperatures of Dragon can reach up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's part of the reason why it will be so visible streaking across the Florida sky in a little while.
Getting some views from inside the cabin now. This is fantastic. So we get these views when we pass over some of the ground stations here on Earth that provide the video straight from the Dragon capsule. So on the far left there is Andrey Fedyaev, and in the seat next to him, to his right, is the commander, Steve Bowen. To his right is the pilot, Woody Hoburg. And then on the far side of the capsule from this view that you're seeing is Emirati astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. You can see they're in their launch and re-entry suits, and they entered that even before our coverage started and performed a successful leak check. So really, they're just waiting for these next series of events, including the claw separation, trunk separation, and the deorbit burn.
Yeah, you can just see, I love this view because you can notice the previous missions that this Dragon supported in the form of the mission patch stickers that are located there just over Andrey Fedyaev's shoulder, kind of like right above Woody's head from this particular view. This particular capsule is the Demo 2 capsule, the Crew-6 capsule, and the Axiom 1 capsule. So this capsule has been through this 3 times before. This is its fourth space flight. And I love that we are able to document those previous missions inside the capsule as a little nod to history.
Yeah, this will be the 4th splashdown of Dragon Endeavour, of course, being the capsule that carried humans for the first time to orbit in a SpaceX Dragon vehicle with Bob and Doug.
We've got about 5 more minutes remaining in this preparation phase for that claw separation command. As you can see, the crew continue to monitor progress using the touchscreen above their head, as well as the tablets that they have strapped to their legs. It seems as though everyone is super calm and really just hanging out.
Really a nod to the Dragon vehicle itself. All of these sequences are fully autonomous. Of course, it's the role of the commander and pilot to really monitor the sequence and the dynamic phases of launch and the re-entry phases, which are really some of the most dynamic that the spacecraft will experience throughout the duration of the 6-month expedition. But they also have the help of the mission specialists. Part of their role is to look over the shoulder of the commander and pilot and look at the screens that are right in front of them, those displays providing telemetry to just be an extra set of eyes and check on some of the things, because there's a lot of data coming in, just to relay them to the commander and pilot. Everybody is watching those screens very intently.
For sure. They also go through extensive training, so even though this is the first time that they have performed this splashdown in real time for this particular crew, they have worked with our Dragon trainers here at SpaceX headquarters for months in preparation for launching this mission. And so while this is the first time they're doing it for real, they have practiced this with simulations many times before lifting off.
Sort of towards where their feet are on the far side of this particular view at the center is that side hatch. Last time we saw the side hatch open on Dragon Endeavour was right before Crew-6 launched to the International Space Station. It was some of the closeout teams in the White Room at Pad 39A that got the crew situated for launch, making sure that they were ready to go. And that side hatch has remained closed through the duration of this mission. It will be opened once again once the Dragon capsule and the crew are recovered by the recovery vessel named Megan. Once the recovery teams outfit the Dragon capsule and bring it onto the Dragon nest, it'll be the side hatch that they'll open to get the crew out.
Once again, we're standing by for claw separation. That is the first physical change that the Dragon will undergo in preparation for atmospheric reentry. That claw separation is what allows for the trunk, the cylindrical, unpressurized section of the spacecraft, to separate, and thereby revealing the heat shield, which is located at the bottom of the service section or the pressurized section of the Dragon spacecraft. So collectively, with the trunk and the pressurized section, the service section there, that trunk will separate, reveal the heat shield, and that heat shield is what will be pointing first, if you will, toward planet Earth as the capsule makes its atmospheric reentry.
So again, we're targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida. The prime landing target for today is off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, on the Atlantic coast. That splashdown time is 9:17 p.m. Pacific time, 12:17 a.m. September 4th Eastern time, so just a little more than an hour from now. To give you an idea of how much ground they're going to cover, you can see on their map in the center of their screen, they are very close to the orbit of the International Space Station in the Dragon. They're over the Indian Ocean right now, just west off of Singapore, on a southeastern track heading towards the western coast of Australia. So just in the matter of an hour, they'll cover really the distance around the world, halfway. Yeah, when if you look at the track of Dragon and the International Space Station, how it orbits the Earth around a flat map, it kind of looks like a sine wave. So now they're on a southeastern track that will swing really south of Australia and then come up the Pacific. So you can see once we get into the re-entry phases, it will cross over southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, and perhaps if you're outside at just the right moment, just a couple minutes prior to that landing site, 12:17 a.m. So if you're still up at midnight watching our coverage and you're in central and northern Florida, be sure to head out, see if you can see, depending on the weather there, see if you can see the plasma trail as Crew-6 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the benefits to a nighttime splashdown. You can still see it during the day, but it is certainly much more striking whenever it's, streaking through the night sky. We've actually had a few nighttime splashdowns prior to this one. So Crew-6 will definitely be a nighttime splashdown, but we also had successful splashdowns at nighttime for Crew-5, Crew-3, Crew-2, and
Dragon,
Crew-1.
SpaceX, we're back with you. Deorbit sequence start.
SpaceX Dragon, put the heads back, and we see the same.
So that deorbit sequence starts with what's called claw sep prep, claw separation preparation. So once that claw begins to separate, it's about 45 seconds for that sequence to initiate, and then the trunk separates about 45 seconds after that claw separation. So it's relatively quick. So we're still in claw sep prep.
Once again, the crew will continue to monitor progress of events using the tablets and touchscreens that they have available to them. The touchscreen directly in front of pilot Woody Hoburg and Commander Steve Bowen also allows them to monitor the state of the Dragon flight computer, as well as be able to keep tabs on any thruster burns that occur. Live view there of mission control here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. And for those that might be wondering, that, yes, is a lava lamp in the center of mission control.
Yeah, lots of activity here. Again, as a reminder, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with the claw separation. This demates the umbilical to the trunk, which has solar panels and have been collecting some of the energy from the sun and providing it to the batteries on board. Once that trunk is separated, or lie on the batteries inside, and there's plenty of margin of that power to provide power for the crew as they await for the recovery teams. But after trunk, all right, and the pyro's fired for the claw separation. Claw separation is complete. We're now preparing for trunk separation. Again, it's just a matter of seconds before we confirm that the trunk is separated.
Once again, since that claw is now separated, we're able to separate the trunk. That claw is where the umbilicals for power and telemetry were connecting between the Dragon capsule and the trunk.
The pyro's fired for that trunk separation.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal trunk jettison.
Copy, nominal trunk jettison.
All right, so yeah, we have a good trunk separation that starts about a 5-minute clock until we begin that deorbit burn. So that means telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is now exposed and ready for atmospheric reentry. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through the solar rays and converting that into battery power. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, but we don't need to since we're coming home, and Dragon has enough battery power stored already.
Up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to reentry, the slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude and the deorbit burn itself. This is the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the 4 thrusters located on top of the spacecraft under the nose cone, they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida and will last about 16 minutes, once it starts, and it looks like we're just under 3.5 minutes away from that deorbit burn initiation.
We did confirm that slewing has started. So again, Dragon positions itself sort of off to the side to jettison the trunk so it doesn't have risk of recontact with the spacecraft and successfully burns up in the atmosphere. So it slews or reorients itself to make sure that those forward bulkhead Dracos are pointed in the right direction. We want a retrograde firing to really slow us down. So retrograde meaning the Draco thrusters fire in the direction that the Dragon is traveling in. So the nose is sort of pointed forward if you were to think of it as traveling along that axis.
It's almost like the brakes, like when you're driving a car.
Essentially. And this is a long burn. This is a 16-minute burn. So once it starts, we're going to stand by and just make sure and follow along and just make sure that that has a good performance. That really sets them up to and decreases their velocity just enough so it loses some altitude and starts to make contact with the atmosphere. That slowing down, really all that does is just reduce the altitude, so it doesn't really slow it down too much. We're still hanging around 17,000 miles an hour, but it's really the atmosphere that does the bulk of the braking. It's the friction against the atmosphere and that plasma buildup. We go from 17,000 miles an hour to 350 through that process.
In just a matter of minutes.
Minutes.
So it really does make sense that this deorbit burn, the braking, the slowing down of the Dragon capsule in preparation for all of that, it makes sense that it's 16 minutes long. We're now about 1.5 minutes away from the initiation of that deorbit burn.
Right, again, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with that claw separation and trunk separation, both of which were successful. So now we're in what's called the deorbit prep. The spacecraft has slewed with the forward Dracos pointed in the right direction, and we're priming those Draco thrusters ready to fire for that 16-minute burn.
Once again, this deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown site just off the Atlantic coast of Florida near Jacksonville. And we're less than 1 minute away from deorbit burn. Once again, this is the last time that those forward Dracos will be utilized. After this burn is complete, we will be able to close the nose cone, which will then basically hide or cover up that area, including the forward hatch, which of course is the hatch that the team used to ingress and egress from the International Space Station. We will be using the side hatch, which is actually outlined by that black liner kind of near the feet of the crew here in this view. That side hatch is what will be utilized for crew egress or exit from the capsule in just under an hour from now. Once again, we're targeting 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time for splashdown.
And we are getting lucky with some of these internal cabin views as we prepare for that deorbit burn start. This will be the last time that the crew is in an orbital daytime. They're currently over the South Indian Ocean, just west off the coast of Australia. And again, their trajectory takes them south around Australia and then on a northeastern trajectory over the Pacific Ocean. The deorbit, the entry interface, the time that it actually has that plasma buildup as it's slowing down significantly through the atmosphere. That will happen, and you may be able to see it depending on where you are, depending on the weather and cloud coverage, but that track brings it over the southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. We do have deorbit burn start. You can see it on their displays, actually. They're, you can see those thruster firings on the left display there. So again, that's a 16-minute burn. So a quick recap: within the last 10 minutes, Dragon jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn. For those operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew on board. the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. For the safety of the crew and your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch, as we'll be bringing you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
The only exception to that, of course, is if you live in Central Florida and you want to look outside through the window or head out into your front or backyard, you should definitely be able to witness Dragon capsules streaking across the night sky. It'll be super bright.
Absolutely.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time that those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on that final trajectory to the landing site, which, as we just said, is off the coast of Florida, near Jacksonville. Right now, as you can see on your screen, Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey continue to use their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details like the entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. Right now, Dragon is flying itself, so all the crew has to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. Great view there of being able to see exactly what the crew can see with respect to those Draco thrusters firing. Now, with Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey ready to deorbit and splash down back on planet Earth, they'll be heading to one of 7 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps us maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather.
Yesterday, NASA and SpaceX jointly selected the primary splashdown location of Jacksonville, Florida. This selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedule for the returning crew members.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for re-entry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always want to make sure that the crew are properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them. Trajectory and ballistics experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with the 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving the station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternate sites while in free flight if sudden weather moves in that we need to avoid. And weather is something we're constantly looking at, making the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. For the Crew-6 return, we looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside the capsule and the recovery teams on the water. We're also looking for wind speeds less than 15 feet per second or about 10 miles an hour and relatively calm seas so we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey back to Florida. Once Dragon began flying free today, we had a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed towards the primary landing site, head to an alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks happened all the way up until we're in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which is underway now, and is the last burn to the trip home and commits Dragon and the capsule and the crew to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
So at this point in time, we are well within the deorbit burn. There's about 10 minutes remaining in this burn. As we mentioned before, it started off as a 16-minute burn, so 6 minutes in, 10 minutes to go. This is the last time that those 4 forward Draco engines located at the top of the Dragon spacecraft will be utilized. This deorbit burn acts as a braking maneuver or slowing down for the capsule in preparation for that for alignment for atmospheric reentry and splashdown. Before the deorbit burn, we were going about 17,500 miles per hour. So we're helping to slow the vehicle down and align it, but really it's the atmosphere and that heat shield located at the bottom of the Dragon capsule that will be doing most of that slowing down. We basically go from that orbital velocity of about 17,000 miles per hour down to about 350 miles per hour when the drogue parachutes will deploy. So there's significant slowing down in that phase of reentry. And this is really just lining the capsule up for that precise that precise landing at the designated location, which today is off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida.
And of course, the parachutes really do a lot of the work from that 350 miles an hour down to about the time of splashdown. The capsule is traveling an approximate 15 miles an hour. It splashes down in the Atlantic coast. And that's done through a series of parachutes. You mentioned the drogues. The drogues provide some initial deceleration as well as stabilization of the vehicle once it passes through the atmosphere. And then those are only deployed for just a few minutes before they're jettisoned, and the 4 main parachutes are deployed and inflated to really slow the vehicle down to the landing site and get us down to that 15 miles an hour.
The crew continues to look pretty calm, collected, and comfortable as they continue to monitor this deorbit burn. We've got just over 7 minutes remaining in this deorbit burn. Once again, the crew has trained and prepared for all phases of flight, including this deorbit and splashdown phase of the mission. So I often like to think that, during moments like this when there's something dynamic going on and we just see the crew chilling, it's such a testament to that preparation, that training that they do both with the NASA teams and the SpaceX teams prior to even arriving at the launch pad.
And they try to maximize the crew's comfort through the duration of Dragon's flight. When we covered undocking just what seems like just a couple of hours ago at this point, they had these launch and entry suits, and that was because they put them on during some of the more dynamic phases, and that includes the actual contact and separation from the International Space Station. But very shortly after they exited the keep-out sphere, which is only 200 meters away, they got the call that they could remove those suits, and they had the suits off for really the most of the duration of the flight. They have them back on, but you can see their visors are up. And even though this is a very dynamic phase, and this is a 16-minute burn and a very important milestone of the Dragon's return to Earth, the visors will come down and the suits will provide that extra layer of protection through atmospheric reentry. That is a very dynamic phase. Of course, there's the plasma buildup on the outside of the station and a blackout period. There's a lot of stress on the vehicle, so that just provides an extra layer of protection for the crew.
Yeah, you mentioned maximizing crew comfort, and we do that not just through operational decisions like when you can take off or doff the suit, but also the design of the suit itself, as well as the seats. So each crew member has a bespoke spacesuit. They basically the suits are specially fitted for each crew member to make sure that it is as comfortable as possible while maintaining the extraordinary high levels of safety required. But the seats as well also have length and sizing customizations in small, medium, large, basically, for the armrest, the bucket, the seat itself, and as well as the footrest. So, yeah, we definitely try to maximize the crew comfort in as many ways as we possibly can. And once again, we are in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that lines the crew up for that precise landing off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we're just under 5 minutes remaining in this burn.
Yeah, and the crew is really just watching the vehicle perform on its own at this point. They're not really executing any commands. You can see they're looking at some of the data that are coming in on their displays. On the far right display, you can see all of those thruster firings. Those are those 4 forward bulkhead Dracos, which at their position would really be right in their eye line. It would be kind of straight up. And it's a retrograde firing again. It's really slowing the spacecraft down to decrease its altitude to meet up with the upper limits of the atmosphere. We're 12 minutes into the burn, have about 4 minutes left.
As we mentioned before, after this deorbit burn is complete, we will be able to close the nose cone, which is the basically the pointy structure at the top of the capsule that has been open to allow for access to that forward hatch, as well as usage of the forward Draco thrusters. So we'll be able to close that, and that will basically make put the capsule back into its aerodynamic shape. And after we close that nose cone, we will begin atmospheric reentry. We will have about a 6 or 7 minute period of anticipated loss of signal, or LOS, as we'll hear it referred to in comms between ground and crew.
And there is some margin built into the operations. This, again, the deorbit burn is executed at the apogee of their trajectory and allows them to decrease that altitude. And it's a 16-minute burn, so that will take us to about 8:40 Pacific, so just a couple of minutes left. They have about 25 minutes until they start experiencing some drag on the atmosphere, and that allows the Dragon spacecraft to do a couple of things. It allows them to close the nose cone, as you mentioned, and also slew the Dragon once again and get into the entry interface with the pica tiles and the heat shields pointed in the right direction to take the loads of the friction of the atmosphere.
Exactly. So if you want to think about Dragon's orientation at the moment, the forward end, or if you think of how Dragon is oriented when it's on the launch pad, it's the top end of the Dragon spacecraft is basically pointing forward along their trajectory. So those thrusters are performing a retrograde burn, which is slowing the vehicle down. So we will want to, after this burn is complete, basically rotate the capsule or slew it in order to make sure that that heat shield is then the end, the bottom end is what is actually pointing toward, in the direction of their trajectory, so that that heat shield is able to do its job, which is really utilize that friction that will be made while coursing through the Earth's atmosphere and slow that vehicle down significantly. Once again, we're going from an orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour, and that atmospheric reentry, that heat shield action will take us down to about 350 miles per hour. So we're about just over 1 minute remaining in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that essentially commits the crew to that precise landing zone just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Once again, we are targeting a splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And again, this is Mission Control here in Hawthorne. The team's here monitoring Dragon's progress and the progress of that deorbit burn. It'll be the crew operations and resource engineer, the core, that's the voice from here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, that relays the burn performance status up to the crew via Dragon to ground.
On your screen there is SpaceX core for this this operational shift. On console tonight is Jake Vendel. As Gary mentioned, this is the primary communicator for from SpaceX Mission Control to the crew. Very similar to NASA's Capcom role.
Dragon Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete and nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
All right, good news there coming from SpaceX core, Jake Fendel, letting us know that the deorbit burn completed and everything went nominal or as expected. So that's all really good news.
Very good. We are in the deorbit sequence now. So that you just heard the nose cone is about to close, and I can see it's actually closing now. In the background, the Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone and shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. So this will help Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey cool and comfortable during reentry, which is coming up here in about 20 minutes. At this point, the nose cone is closing again and protecting the forward hatch for reentry. Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey are using their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
So we're about 2 minutes until the nose cone is completely closed and locked in. Once again, we are in the deorbit sequence. So far, we have separated the trunk and we have completed the deorbit burn. And right now, we are closing the nose cone. This is the final physical change or modification to the Dragon capsule prior to reentry. After the nose cone is closed, we will slew or reorient Dragon to basically make sure that the heat shield is what is pointing first toward planet Earth, and that will line us up for atmospheric reentry.
And a lot of that is in work now in concurrence. The closing of the nose cone is underway, as well as the slewing. Again, there's plenty of margin here from the time that the deorbit burn is complete, that 16-minute burn, and the time of entry interface. Make sure there's, if anything, if they have time to correct anything, that is already built in, but everything's looking good so far. Making sure the heat shields are pointed the right way, nose cone is closed, and the crew is prepped with that nitrogen purge. So we saw the views of the crew from the inside of the capsule with their visors up. Again, those visors will come down, and they'll part of the, not only do the suits actually provide that extra protection, but Kate, you mentioned that they'll actually make sure that they provide cooling and comfort, because there's a lot of heat that's being generated through the reentry process. The outside of the vehicle can experience upwards of 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll purge some cool air through the suits. But the interior of the capsule, there's also a thermal system that will help pump some cool air there as well. So the crew generally stays really comfortable, even though the exterior of the capsule does get super hot, as you said. With that plasma buildup, it'll be certainly one of the more dynamic things that the spacecraft goes through during its mission. But yeah, the crew stays pretty comfortable, and that nitrox air, which is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the same stuff that is put into scuba tanks for scuba divers, that same breathing air, we pump that through the suits to allow the crew to stay super comfy during their reentry.
We did get confirmation that the nose cone is closed. So this deorbit sequence we're really making our way through very well.
As we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject that cool nitrox air that I mentioned before, that's being delivered to the suits worn by Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while the external temperatures of Dragon reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield will be pointing forward, leading the capsule to the landing site. Now, speaking of that heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of Pica 3.0, Pica meaning phenolic impregnated carbon ablator. The first generation Pica was initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
Yeah, really cool history here. SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop Pica X, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply missions that successfully resupplied the space station on 20 different missions. Pica 3.0 was developed specifically for use on the Dragon 2 crew and cargo, with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down cost cost en masse.
Yeah, pretty cool. The remainder of Dragon capsule is comprised primarily of SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection, which is lighter weight versus Pika and protects the underlying composite structure during reentry to basically ensure that the structural capabilities are maintained from mission to mission.
And while Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, Kate, you mentioned 3,500 degrees, during peak re-entry conditions, the characteristics of the TPS, the thermal protection system, coupled with the ECLIS, environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior, will ensure that Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey stay cool and comfortable during all phases of re-entry through splashdown.
After Dragon Endeavour has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. As we mentioned before, the first set will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes, and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in April earlier this year. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
Vehicle velocity at drogue deploy is approximately 300 miles per hour. They deploy at about 18,000 feet. Then vehicle velocity at main parachute deploy is approximately 119 miles an hour. They deploy at about 6,500 feet. Vehicle velocity at water splashdown is about 16 miles an hour. Highest G load the crew will experience during re-entry is approximately 3.5 Gs. So again, the nose cone is closed. Those nose cones are secured by a series of latches. The first set of hooks is closed, and the second set of hooks is traveling to secure the nose cone. Again, that is closed, and the vehicle is slewing or orienting itself with the deorbit position, with the entry interface position, to allow the heat shield to meet up with the atmosphere. And those Pika tiles that were designed to take those loads of the heat will be pointing the right direction.
One correction, I did mention Crew-6 launched in April. It actually launched in March of this year.
Right. March 2nd Eastern Time, I think March 1st Pacific Time. It's 8:47 p.m. Pacific Time now. We're about 30 minutes from the expected splashdown time. Again, we're tracking 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time over in Florida near Jacksonville, which is our primary landing site here at the Pacific Coast, 9:17 p.m.
Dragon, SpaceX, nose cone secured for entry.
SpaceX Dragon's office.
So again, 2 sets of latches that secure that nose cone. Those have traveled and confirmed that not only is the nose cone closed, but it is secured for re-entry.
And with that, Dragon, I've got a entry sequence brief. Report ready to copy.
SpaceX Dragon, we are ready to copy.
All right, Steve. We see blackout start at 0404, blackout end at 0411, and splashdown at 0417. No update to vehicle status. Weather still looks good. How copy?
Zero 0404, 0411, and 0417. Weather still looks good. And I think that copies it all. Thank you.
Good readback. One more note, we noticed prior to the burn a few of the tablets were not secure to the satchels. I'm hoping that you can positively verify that each tablet is indeed secure.
We're working on that right now, and we'll get it by 150.
Copy.
All right, that was SpaceX Core Jake Vendel letting Commander Steve Bowen know our updated timeline for that expected loss of signal. We heard them read out 0404 to 0411, those times being, the space standard, the GMT time zone. So for us, we would expect that to be at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. 12:04 p.m. Eastern, and lasting until the 11-minute mark there. So just slightly, actually no, right on time. We did say about a 6 or 7 minute loss of signal. Splashdown time remains as we originally were targeting, that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And you can just see just how quick in succession everything is. From 9:04 to 9:11, we go from 17,000 miles an hour to 350 miles an hour, and then through the drogue parachute deployment and main parachute deployment over the course of 6 minutes, we get down to 15 miles an hour at the time of splashdown.
Yeah, and during that time, the crew will experience about 3 to 5 Gs during this reentry phase. So pretty similar to what they would have felt during the launch phase of the mission.
We're focusing on the flight control teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne through the duration of today's operations. If you've been following along for our coverage, we've been joined with the flight control teams over in Houston, Texas. Of course, they are monitoring very closely, but that was really for joint operations. It's a different set of flight criteria and flight rules when the two flight control rooms are working in tandem, operating by the same flight criteria. And there is that dance of the Dragon and the International Space Station. Really, the responsibility of the Dragon is on the teams here in SpaceX. They are, of course, communicating constantly with the teams over at NASA, and the NASA teams are in the loop monitoring the progression of the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonauts' return home to Earth.
So we've mentioned before that our anticipated loss of signal is coming up at 9:04 p.m. and will last about 7 minutes until 9:11 p.m. Pacific time. This occurs on all of our Dragon reentry missions. It is pretty standard and expected, the 7-minute period where the Dragon is unable to send any telemetry to the ground or be commanded from the ground, including no communications, which is why we call it a communications blackout. So the reason for that being, as we've said a couple of times, the heat shield located at the bottom of the capsule will be doing a ton of work as it encounters that friction from the atmosphere as it re-enters. This is a good thing. It's helping to slow the vehicle down from 17,000 miles per hour to about 350 miles per hour. Now, as a result of all that work being done by the heat shield and the friction, this plasma forms on the exterior of the capsule, and that's why we have these thermal protection systems, or TPS, all around Dragon to help protect it during these phases where that plasma builds up and gets really hot. It'll reach about 3,500 degrees or thereabout during this reentry phase. So pretty standard. That being said, it does make for a great view. If you live in Central Florida, you will definitely be able to see Dragon streaking across the night sky. Really, if you look up, you won't be able to miss it.
Now, of course, once Dragon splashes down, and we did get that read very recently up to the crew that we're right on target for that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville. The recovery teams are already staged. We got word that the recovery vessel named Megan is out there. That'll be the one that actually lifts the Dragon capsule up from the water. There's also fast boats and jet skis and whole teams really ready to go to support the recovery operations. We've supported many nighttime landings or splashdowns in the past, and so they're very used to these operations. Dragon has systems built into the outside of the capsule that allow for flashing lights and a lot of calling of attention to itself to make sure that the recovery teams can easily see it. And of course, the assets themselves have equipment on board to be able to locate, track, and find, and of course recover the Dragon capsule. And so those teams will go out. They'll perform a sniff. That's actually the first thing that'll happen. happen is the fast boats will circle the vehicle and just make sure that the Dragon capsule itself is safe to approach. There's dedicated teams that go out and make sure there's no leaking of nitrogen tetroxide or any hazardous materials before the rest of the teams move in. There's a lot of team members that are out there now to support the operation.
Yeah, this evening for this Atlantic Coast recovery, we are utilizing our recovery vessel Megan, and those teams are stationed about 3 miles away from the targeted splashdown site. So it's one of my favorite but frustrating parts of splashdown is after we see the capsule actually land in the water and we see the parachutes be released and splash down as well, we then have to wait for the recovery vessel to trudge those 3 miles, and in that time we're able to see the fast boats approach the capsule, as the name suggests, much faster. They are slower than Megan, the primary recovery vessel. So they can get out there much quicker and perform, as you said, that sniff test as well as recover the parachutes from the water.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of improvements just because, you know, we're talking about Crew-6 right now. So this is not just a 6 mission. We've also done this with the demonstration mission with Bob and Doug, Demo 2. And so this will really be the 7th time that we've done it for a crew operation. And so the recovery teams have become much more efficient and had lessons learned along the way. So the recovery operations we've seen just get a lot faster overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've done nighttime splashdown operations for Crew 1, Crew 2, Crew 3, Crew 5, as well as Axiom 2, just a couple months ago. So yeah, the recovery teams at this point have actually had more nighttime splashdowns than they have daytime. I should say for crew missions.
That's right.
Not for NASA crew, but for crewed missions, I'm not counting the cargo missions.
Right. And it is a good nod to make sure that we mention the private missions as well. We mentioned the Axiom mission 1 and 2, of course, Inspiration 4. So there's a lot of practice with the recovery operations in these teams. Of course, we have the views here of the flight operations teams here in Hawthorne that are monitoring the Dragon's re-entry. Again, we've successfully performed a deorbit burn, so we're just waiting for that entry interface that's coming up at 9:04. So really just 7 minutes from now, and that is the beginning of the blackout period. That's when the Dragon capsule starts to experience the molecules of the atmosphere a lot closer, so that it experiences much more friction, and we start to see that plasma build up, and it provides a significant amount of drag and shaves a lot of velocity off of the Dragon capsule right now, traveling about 17,000 miles an hour. And through the 7-minute period of blackout, where there is that plasma buildup, where we are traveling through the more denser parts of the atmosphere and slowing down significantly, we'll get on the back end of that. 9/11, they said, was the exit of that blackout period, where we start getting communications from the crew, and we're on the back end of the entry interface. That will be, we'll get down to 350 miles an hour.
Yeah, if memory serves me correctly, we typically hear SpaceX Core start reaching out to the crew about 1 minute early. There have been some instances where we've been able to regain communications with the crew a little bit earlier than originally anticipated. So probably around the 9:10 p.m. Minute mark, Pacific, I should say, we might start hearing SpaceX Core hail the Crew-6.
And it could go in the other direction too. This is, of course, an estimate based on the predicted plasma buildup and the predicted comms blackout. But of course, there could be another minute or so before they regain comms, and that's all built into the timeline. We'll hear those checks go up on Dragon to ground, and they'll continuously call the crew.
SpaceX Dragon, compass is secure, restraints are tightened, visors are down.
Copy, Dragon, tablet secure, restraints tightened, and visors down. With that, we are 5 minutes until the predicted comm blackout. Dragon Endeavour, see you on the other side at 0411.
0411, we'll talk to you then.
All right, that was the voice of Crew-6 Commander Steve Bowen, letting us know that the teams have put away and secured the tablets that were prior to now, they were located and strapped onto their legs outside of the spacesuit. So those are now put away, and they have also closed the visors. So the last time we saw the crew inside the capsule, their visors were up. They've now closed the visors, and that provides really a leak-tight environment for the crew during this dynamic phase of reentry. For those of you that have recently joined over the last 45 minutes, we've basically been executing step-by-step the deorbit sequence, starting with the releasing of the claw, which is what was connecting the Dragon capsule to the trunk being the unpressurized section that is jettisoned in order to reveal the heat shield located at the bottom of the Dragon spacecraft. So we released the claw, the trunk separated. We then performed a 16-minute long deorbit burn. We've also slewed or reoriented the capsule so that the heat shield is facing it's hard to describe it in my head, but it basically, the heat shield is what is leading the capsule to the targeted splashdown site, which today is in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. As we just heard, we have an anticipated loss of signal, or LOS, that will last for 7 minutes, and it will start at 9:04 p.m. Pacific in about 3 minutes from now. That is standard for all of our Crew Dragon reentry missions, and at that point in time, the Dragon will not be able to send any telemetry or data to the ground. The ground will not be able to command Dragon at all, and we will not be able to receive any communications from the crew or to them either.
Now, on the back end of the communications blackout, when we receive a word from the crew, it'll be the crew themselves that read out some of the calls of their status, and we'll be relying on that, and of course the data that we're receiving from Dragon now that we're outside of that blackout to determine the performance of the vehicle. We'll see those drogues. There's 4 main parachutes that allow for a safe landing. The parachutes are designed with that 4th in mind, so that even if the 4th were not to inflate all the way, 3 could actually provide enough resistance to properly decelerate the Dragon so that it lands right on time and provides a normal amount of drag on the vehicle to get us down to that 15 miles an hour at the expected time. The views we're seeing now are, of course, of the flight operations team here in Mission Control in Hawthorne. We'll soon hopefully be getting some views from the recovery vessels out in the Atlantic Ocean. That's the recovery vessel Megan, as well as the recovery teams on fast boats and jet skis. We should be getting views hopefully from the Atlantic Ocean to see the Crew-6's entry through the atmosphere.
I was trying to look through my notes. I can't quite remember what it is off the top of my head, but you were talking about the parachutes before, and the drogue chutes that we deploy prior to the main parachutes. Those drogue chutes help provide additional slowing and stability for the Dragon capsule as it comes out of that atmospheric reentry. And I forget what factor it is that if we didn't have the drogue parachutes, I think it's something like the main parachutes would have to be manufactured to be 2 to 3 times stronger, which of course would add weight to the capsule itself. And in spaceflight, everything is weight. You want to minimize the weight that you're taking. So those drogue chutes are definitely small but mighty in the job that they have to do. Now we're under a minute away from that, or just a couple seconds rather, away from that anticipated loss of signal, or LOS. This will be a 7-minute period in which we were unable to communicate with the crew, and we are unable to command Dragon or receive telemetry or data from it.
Okay, we're in that loss of signal. The clock starts now, right on time, 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 12:04 a.m. Eastern. That starts the 7-minute clock of the anticipated communications blackout. Kate, as you mentioned, the teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne may start reaching out to the crew a little early. The crew themselves may see an acquisition of signal from their own data and call out to the teams to let them know that they're outside of the blackout. It could be intermittent too, so there's a lot of different factors, but the key here is communication, and they'll continue to talk to make sure that they are relaying they, meaning the crew, are relaying the information to the teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne, and of course the Hawthorne will be able to respond.
Right. So for those of you that have just recently joined us, at this point we have entered a communications blackout period, a loss of signal or LOS, and lasts approximately 7 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft. During this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control, which you see there on your screen, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself. During this reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from orbital velocity, which is about 17,000 miles per hour, and the top temperature that Dragon will experience upon reentry is about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. As we've mentioned before, this expected blackout period is, we anticipate it to last about 7 minutes. It might be a little bit less, it might be a little bit more, but we will definitely be able to hear the crew once they do re-enter from that anticipated loss of signal. We'll have acquisition of signal, which is AOS.
That's right, and the last read up to the crew prior to their entry and the beginning of the blackout period, we were still tracking an on-time splashdown. Again, for those following along, that's 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific Time.
We're now within the atmospheric entry phase of the return for the Crew-6 crew. Once again, the plasma buildup on the exterior of the capsule results in our inability to command or communicate with the Dragon capsule during this time. This happens with all of our crew missions, and we expect this to end at about 9:11 p.m. Pacific or 12:11 a.m. Eastern. Live view there of SpaceX Mission Control located just behind Gary and myself. They are continuing to monitor the length of the acquisition of, the length of this blackout period, and we will be able to hear SpaceX Core, who for this evening shift is Jake Vendel. We'll probably start to hear him hail the crew around 9:11 or 9:10 p.m. Pacific.
So if you're following along of our coverage and you are in southern Mexico or the Yucatan Peninsula, there is a chance, depending on the weather that you have down there, that you would have been able to see the beginning of the entry interface. We're now about 4 minutes in of a 7-minute blackout period.
This is a great graphic indicating the trajectory. This is an ascending trajectory that Dragon is taking. So as Gary just said, over the Gulf of Mexico, across the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. So if you're tuning in from Central Florida, head outside right now, look up, because this looks like our first live view from the WB-57.
That's right. This is a high altitude aircraft that has thermal imaging, so we're able to get some of those views of the Dragon vehicle in the middle of its entry interface. Again, we're about 4 minutes in. We have a tally-ho on the vehicle from the WB-57, and actually maybe about 5 minutes in at this point. So maybe a little bit more than 2 minutes. Again, there's some variation in the predicted 7-minute time period. It's not exact. We might hear a little early, a little later.
So as we were saying, if you're in Central Florida, head outside right now. You should be able to see this glowing streak cross over as we are targeting. There's that streak I was just mentioning. That's a live view, not thermal. This is heading towards the Atlantic coast of near Jacksonville, Florida. So a beautiful view, such a striking visual that we have for these nighttime splashdowns.
Recovery teams are in position off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we are still targeting our expected splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern. We only have about a minute and some change of this blackout period anticipated. And again, there's some variation on when we can hear from the crew.
So what you're seeing on your...
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
So at this point, we're going to hear SpaceX Core begin to hail. As Gary said, this blackout period is estimated. So we're now beginning to reach out to the crew to see if we've regained that communications capability.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
What you're seeing on your screen now is a live view of the thermal cam on the WB-57.
And we hear Crew-6 from inside the cabin on the back end of the blackout.
Copy, Dragon. We see a healthy flight computer. Expect automated chute deployment.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
There's our live view of the crew, our first view of them on the other side of that communications blackout. At this point in time, they are re-entering through the Earth's atmosphere over the coast of Florida, heading towards Jacksonville, Atlantic coast. Up next will be the deployment of the drogue parachutes, which should happen in about 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes.
You can see they got through some of the thicker parts of the atmosphere, and that plasma buildup is starting to dissipate. We have about, less than 2 minutes or so.
Dragon, SpaceX, GPS converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
All right, so that call out just letting the crew know that they can expect to have the initial parachute deployment, that is the drogue parachutes, and that those typically deploy about 18,000 feet. At that point in time, the capsule is going around 350 miles per hour.
Some of the data and telemetry from Dragon is in meters, so if you do hear those calls from the crew and from us, some of the telemetry we're seeing is in the metric system. Confirmation that seat rotation is in progress. This allows the crew to be in the proper position to take the loads of the chutes as they experience the G-forces that the chutes exhibit upon deployment. They provide some drag on the vehicle. And again, we're traveling about 350 miles an hour. So from here, with the drogue deployments and main deployment, we're going to get down to about 15 miles an hour. Drogue deployment coming up in approximately
Dragon,
20 seconds.
Brace for drogue window.
And we're roughly 30 seconds away from that drogue deployment. SpaceX Core just telling the crew to prepare for the deployment of those drogue parachutes. At this point in time, they are around, or when the drogues are deployed, they're traveling around 350 miles per hour. At the time that the main parachutes are deployed, just seconds later, they'll be going around 120 miles per hour. So these drogue parachutes help provide further deceleration as well as stability for the capsule prior to those main parachute deployments.
Drogue pyros have fired, and we have good confirmation of drogue chutes. 2 drogues.
It's a view from inside the parachute bucket.
Dragon, nominal descent rate and recovery team reports a visual on 2 healthy drogues.
SpaceX Dragon, copy. Continue.
Should see drogue chute jettison here momentarily. We'll see those 2 chutes that you see be released from the capsule, just like so, and release the 4 parachutes, now deploying.
At this point in time, Dragon has saved all of its propulsion systems and is now has already terminated that nitrox suit and cabin purges. Those were helping to keep the crew cool during reentry. Looks like we have 4 very beautiful and healthy main parachutes.
Dragon, we see a nominal descent rate on 4 healthy mains.
SpaceX Dragon copies, and SpaceX Dragon coming up on 1,000.
So there's that confirmation.
Copy, 1,000 meters.
Confirmation of those 4 healthy chute deployments. Now standing by for splashdown. At the point of splashdown, the capsule will be going about 15 or 16 miles per hour. Continuing to decelerate from a rate of from a speed of about 120 miles per hour.
800.
So we will now begin.
Copy, 800.
To hear Commander Steve Bowen call out the altitude as they approach the water surface.
That is again in meters.
Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. We had to learn how to make Dragon waterproof, but once you do that, it's very much a rinse, review, reuse type process.
600.
Copy, 600.
600 meters, and the descent rate is as predicted, meaning we're targeting that splashdown time in about a minute.
Live view of Dragon Endeavour with the Crew-6 team members on board, being held up by 4 beautiful main parachutes.
Dragon, we see 400.
We're now about 400 meters above the ocean surface.
SpaceX Dragon 200 braced for splashdown.
Copy, braced for splashdown.
Again, the seats have been rotated in a position to take the loads of re-entry and parachute deployment as well as splashdown. The crew is braced. We are inside 100 meters.
Dragon Endeavour continuing its slow descent. There we can see splashdown on screen. Those parachutes are then cut and released. Dragon Endeavour has now returned home. NASA astronauts Steve Bowen, Woody Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. You're in water, Dragon.
Copy, splashdown, and we see main chutes cut.
After a 17-hour return journey from space, Crew-6 is home.
So the teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes to make their way to Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey inside the Dragon. You can see the recovery forces in some of the views that you're seeing. Of course, these views being provided by the recovery vessels. You saw there was a helo deployed, providing some visuals and lighting of the Dragon capsule.
Stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. Dragon Endeavour, on behalf of NASA and SpaceX, welcome back home. Thank you for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, SpaceX Endeavour. We greatly appreciate all the support from all the initial training through the launch, throughout the mission, keeping us abreast of all the status of the vehicle, and all the support all the way down. This has been incredible. Greatly appreciated. I look forward to working with you all again.
Copy all, and you've got a room full of happy people here. We've got some systems to verify safe before we give the boats a go to approach. I'll be back with you on that topic in a minute.
And SpaceX Dragon coffees. We'll just enjoy the wallowing here. It might be soothing. Maybe I'll be napping soon.
So there we just heard SpaceX Core just indicating to the crew that we're going to do some checks here. Here from Mission Control Hawthorne, we're going to do some system checks to make sure that everything is safe as necessary on the Dragon Endeavour capsule. They will then give the go for safe approach to the teams there that you see on your screen in the fast boats. One of those boats will focus on recovering the parachutes from the water. The other will begin inspections, a sniff test for those onboard propellants, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine. They are toxic if someone were to breathe them, so we definitely want to ensure the safety of the entire recovery team as well as the crew. So one of the teams in the fast boats will perform a sniff test using devices while wearing personal protective equipment to ensure that none of those propellants have leaked out and that there's no vapors lingering from, just many minutes ago when those thrusters were actually firing back in space.
Precisely. Now this is the fourth splashdown of Dragon Endeavour and completes the fourth mission, Crew-6, splashing down right on time, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific Time. We're getting views from the recovery vessels that are out many nautical miles away from the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And the crew and teams here in Hawthorne reported a stable 1 position. That just notifies that the capsule is in the ideal position, floating in the Atlantic Ocean there, upright, with the heat shield in the water and the nose cone pointed towards the sky, as you see there.
As you mentioned, this is the 4th splashdown for this particular capsule. Most recently, it supported Axiom 1. Prior to that, Crew 2. And prior to that, Demo 2. So this capsule, I have great personal attachment to. I had the opportunity as part of my day job to go inside the capsule while we were building it. And when I say building it, I mean like for the first time, not during the refurbishment process. And when we were originally building it for the Demo 2 mission, I just remember being inside this capsule and thinking,
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach the capsule. Expect fast boats alongside in just a few minutes.
Dragon, we look for light.
All right, good news there from Mission Control, letting the crew know that everything checked out from a systems check, and the team there on screen in the fast boat now has the green light to approach and begin performing these sniff checks for those vapors for the onboard propellants. Just to conclude my thought, it's always great to see this capsule fly and land, and it just makes me so happy to see it with another mission under its belt.
It's part of the design of the Dragon capsule is to be reusable. So even after the harsh conditions of 3,500 degrees of plasma buildup and being in the salty ocean, teams are still able to refurbish it and prepare it for the next mission. And this is the 4th successful flight of Endeavour. So after those hypergol checks, Dragon teams we may see some of the team members crawling on the outside of Dragon and begin the rigging process, as the recovery vessel Megan has the equipment necessary to bring the Dragon out of the water into what's called the Dragon's nest, and that allows the capsule to be positioned and stable on a boat and allow some of the personnel on board that boat, that ship, to open up the side hatch. We were talking about the side hatch a little earlier. That has remained closed through the duration of the mission. The last time it was open was on Launch Pad 39A, as some of the teams were preparing Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey for their launch to the International Space Station and the beginning of their expedition of science, maintenance, and upgrades aboard. Now it'll be opened again here very shortly. It does take some time, so it could be 30 minutes to an hour before we actually see them on the boat and they start egressing the capsule. But we'll provide coverage until they're safely aboard the recovery vessel Megan, and all 4 crew members have egressed Dragon.
So this image that we see here was taken just minutes ago, a beautiful capture of the moment when Crew-6 was re-entering over Florida. We can actually see NASA's VAB and Pad 39A in the distance. So this is such a cool time-lapse capture of the re-entry streak that we saw just minutes ago of the Crew-6 re-entry and splashdown.
Now, of course, we have recovery teams out there that are executing these operations. We can actually see some of the personnel there. We do have a public affairs officer on recovery vessel Megan, Courtney Beasley, who is standing by and watching the operations unfold and providing some coverage from there. I'll do a comms check with Courtney Beasley, who's there via satellite phone. Courtney, can you hear us?
Gary, I have you loud and clear. How do you hear me?
Loud and clear. Courtney, we were very jealous, and we were talking a lot, Kate and I, about the views of Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere and the plasma trail and the landing, of course, in the Atlantic Ocean. I can't imagine a person who had a better view than you. From your perspective on recovery vessel Megan, how was that landing?
Gary, it was absolutely beautiful. We were about 1.5 nautical miles away from the landing zone, and we had a great view from the front of the ship. We were actually able to track the spacecraft. Starting when it broke the horizon, we heard the sonic boom loud and clear and tracked the spacecraft all the way down through splashdown.
SpaceX,
There's something beautiful about a nighttime splashdown. The only thing lighting the sky up tonight was the moon, the stars, and Crew-6 returning back home to Earth.
Stand by for a PMC with the SpaceX flight surgeon on the ship.
And we did just hear a call out indicating that the sniff checks were successful, so the close approach team now has the green light to begin climbing on board the Dragon capsule, so we should see the recovery continue along. But I want to hear more from Courtney with her bird's eye, or with her live action view.
That's right. Yeah. Back to you, Courtney. We just wanted to pause for some of those communications with the crew and just follow along on the action here. But really want to understand what it's like there. You got some beautiful views. We are seeing, some of the seas. I think that we're tracking about. We're tracking sea states and wind, and we were talking about weather quite a bit leading up to today's landing. From your perspective, how is the weather out there?
Yeah, Gary, it's about 80 degrees out here right now with fairly clear skies. Like I said, we were able to track that spacecraft pretty good tonight. About 9-mile-an-hour winds out of the east. The waves are considered to be rolling waves, so they're not choppy, but they are pretty big and more spread out rolling waves. But weather-wise, I think the crew will like what they feel when they get out of that capsule today and take their first breath of fresh air back here on Earth.
Just to get some appreciation of what it took to stage the recovery forces and be prepared for this moment, just really moments after Dragon splashed down. We saw some of those fast boats rolling out to make sure that they were getting the crew as quickly as possible. Can you give us a sense of what it's taken to make sure the recovery vessels were here at this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Our journey actually started several hours ago in Jacksonville. The MedOps teams and the recovery director boarded the first helicopter, and they were the first group to arrive on the ship about 4.5 hours before splashdown. So those medical teams took the time to get everything situated on the ship and ready to tend to the crew. And about 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed the fast boats into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we landed on the helicopter pad on top of the vessel about an hour before splashdown. And all of the teams have been hard at work since we touched down on the boat to get their various disciplines ready for Crew-6 to arrive home.
Excellent, Courtney. And last question before we let you go is we're seeing some of the recovery personnel on the Dragon capsule preparing for its eventual lift onto recovery vessel Megan. What can we expect to see in the next few moments?
the crew is out
Copy. We also have you 5x5.
they'll be
Boats are working on you and rigging up the vehicle. I'll get back to you closer to capsule lift.
Teams, and we'll have the opportunity to take those spacesuits off and get comfortable back here on Earth. And then, of course, they'll run through those medical checks. They'll get back on the helicopter and head back to the airport where they'll board their plane back to Houston to begin their post-flight period. You're probably getting a better view than I am right now, so I'll let you walk through that. But back here on the ship, once the crew is off, they're not the only ones returning from space today. We'll actually stay here a little longer with the cargo team since there was International Space Station cargo returned on this flight. So once we get back to the airport, the cargo teams will begin doing cargo processing, taking photos of all of the articles that were included in the cargo, and they will pack all of that into box trucks that will take them back to various NASA centers. But Gary, an overall beautiful splashdown tonight, and I hope it was the same for you back in Hawthorne.
Absolutely, Courtney. We've been getting some fantastic views. Thank you so much for that report. That was Courtney Beasley out on the recovery ship, providing live coverage from the landing site just off the coast of Jacksonville. We're back in the action now, seeing some of the views from the recovery vessel and the recovery operations team, including helicopters, fast boats, jet skis, and of course, we're getting views from some of the ships that are standing by, waiting to actually pull Dragon out of the water.
So at this point in time, the Dragon capsule has safed all of its systems. Mission Control did a systems check to make sure that that was true and accurate. They gave the fast approach teams the green light to approach and begin the rigging process, which is what we are now seeing underway. Additionally, they have recovered the parachutes from the water. So those were, we were able to see those being dragged onto a boat. And what we have now is there's one individual that we see kind of like a spider monkey crawling all around the capsule and attaching the necessary rigging, the straps. These are what will help to stabilize and lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. For tonight's operations, we are using our Atlantic Coast recovery vessel, Megan, and we, in hopefully in probably like 30-ish minutes from now, it kind of varies depending on the sea states, which, as we can see, a little bit more waves than some other missions, but still well within the limits for recovery, really probably unfazing to the individuals that are out here doing the work as they train extensively for these operations, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So obviously we can see one person there working to secure that strap around the base of the service section of the Dragon capsule, and that is one of the primary stabilization strap rings that will help to lift the capsule out of the water and onto the Dragon's nest on board Megan.
And of course, the teams here are very close to the capsule because we passed those hypergol leak checks, and it's safe around the vehicle. You see some of the personnel, of course, climbing on the outside, preparing the vehicle. You can actually see some of the tethers that are on the outside to allow it to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. Some of our views are even getting better as the recovery ships that are providing some of the live views that we're seeing are getting closer to the Dragon Endeavour.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, this is one of the coolest but also frustrating moments of recovery for me personally, just because obviously for safety reasons, we have to station the recovery vessel and team a safe distance away from the intended splashdown target. It sounded like they were, according to Courtney, about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown, but those fast boats are called fast boats for a reason. The primary recovery vessel, Megan, is not a fast boat, so it does take about 30 minutes for it to reach that the capsule, essentially. So it's great because we see the views get closer and closer slowly, but just because I love to see the action as soon as possible, I wish it was a little bit closer, but that's just me.
It's great to get some of these thermal images. Of course, over on the East Coast, it's well past midnight, so very dark out there, but still getting some fantastic views. The recovery forces are not necessarily getting our views. You know, they don't have the thermal cameras. They're getting eyes on the vehicle.
This is what they're saying. This is an
precisely
actual visible spectrum.
Yes, with the visible spectrum, because of course the vehicle is being lit by spotlights, and you can see the fast boat itself has lights. So there's plenty of opportunities to make sure they have. They have the capsule well within view, and all the teams that are surrounding in different recovery ships and different recovery vessels are aware of the capsule's presence. You can see some of the features of the Dragon capsule as the recovery forces outfit it with the rigging necessary to bring it onto recovery vessel Megan. Some of the circles you see in front of the individual that's on the Dragon capsule, that's where those parachutes were deployed from. Above that is the nose cone, which is, of course, closed prior to re-entry. It was open through the duration of most of the flight of Dragon to and from the International Space Station. It needed to remain open to perform that deorbit burn to, of course, successfully get home. But now it's closed, and you can see provided the protection necessary from the plasma buildup through the Dragon's re-entry. Some of the dark circles you see at the front of the vehicle, and by front I mean where that individual is on the capsule. The darker circles are some of the outlines of where those service section Dracos are, and the brighter white area is actually the base of the Super Draco engines, and these are inhibited once it gets into orbit, but are very much necessary through the launch phase. In the event of any abort that is necessary, it would be those Super Dracos that you're seeing, the bright white area, that would fire and provide enough thrust capability to escape a speeding Falcon 9 rocket.
Once again, we can see the recovery vessel Megan making its way closer and closer to the Dragon Endeavour capsule, which has splashed down off the Atlantic coast of Florida. We can see the recovery team in the fast boats that have now approached the Dragon capsule. They are in the process of rigging it up with the necessary straps and equipment that will be utilized for right there. That is the actual, the Dragon's nest that we will be lifting the Dragon capsule onto. The lifting mechanism, it's kind of hard to tell right now, but that almost house-like structure over the end of the aft end of the boat will actuate downward, and then the straps will be used to lift the Dragon capsule, and then the whole thing will actuate back into the orientation that we see it here to help secure, or to place it in to secure the Dragon capsule in that nest. After the capsule is placed in the nest, they will then just roll or translate the nest forward to where the platform is that we will actually be able to see the recovery team open the side hatch and eventually have Crew-6 egress or exit from the capsule. So if you look through the back there, you can see the capsule. That's that white speck in the background there in the darkness behind Megan.
Yeah, you can actually see the distance now. It's becoming much more clear. The space recovery vessel was designed very much with a Dragon in mind. Of course, that hydraulic lift bringing it onto the Dragon's nest, and that platform, Kate, that you were describing, it allows for access right at the right spot, right in front of that side hatch. The side hatch will be facing right towards the camera. That will allow, when that Dragon nest comes in towards that platform, the crew on board recovery vessel Megan will have access to that side hatch to go ahead and open that. All 4 crew members will remain seated throughout that process, but the Dragon side hatch will be open, and the recovery teams will take the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonaut out one at a time.
Yeah, you mentioned that this vessel had Dragon in mind. You couldn't be more correct. When SpaceX acquired this vessel, we actually have two of them, one for Atlantic operations, one for Gulf operations, and both of them are pretty identical. They all, each have a lifting mechanism, a nest. We basically designed the interior and exterior of the vessel to accommodate efficient and speedy operations for Dragon recovery. In addition to these physical recovery assets, there are also medical bays where each crew member will get a quick medical checkout by the flight surgeon after egress, as well as a helicopter deck that in some instances is utilized to have the crew depart from there. So it is definitely a bespoke boat, if you will, a vessel for these Dragon recovery operations. And it's quite necessary because we want to make sure that these operations are as efficient as possible. We don't want to leave the crew in the water or in the capsule any longer than they need to be. So we really try to make sure that this is as efficient as possible. And certainly this vessel, both vessels, because like I said, they're pretty much mirror images for both Gulf and Atlantic coast operations. Make sure that they are as smooth as possible.
And we're just about 23 minutes from the time of splashdown. Again, that splashdown time, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific. So we're already closing in on the vehicle. The recovery teams at this point, just to do a quick recap, have done initial checks of the spacecraft to make sure there was no hypergol leaks, any hazardous gases or materials, just to do a quick sniff check and make sure that the spacecraft was safe to approach. Once that was cleared, we saw some individuals on the Dragon capsule outfitting it with the rigging necessary for those straps you see on recovery vessel Megan. That hydraulic lift will bend forward and be attached to the Dragon capsule and be lifted off right onto that beautiful, perfectly Dragon-designed little disc you see on the Dragon nest. That's where Dragon will rest very comfortably to allow access to the crew. So that has happened over the past 24 minutes or so. And we are making great progress right on the timeline for the recovery ship to arrive.
Dragon, SpaceX, be advised, we're transitioning the forward link over to the recovery vessel. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon top.
Once again, Megan is making its way to the capsule, which we can see getting larger there in the background of this image, or excuse me, of this shot that we have on board Megan. Once the capsule is a little bit closer, we'll begin to see the team in the water attach the straps and all the equipment necessary from the boat onto all the straps and equipment that they have been attaching around and on the Dragon capsule itself. We can see the recovery team member who is the individual that basically crawls around on top of the capsule itself, still on there. Once all of the equipment is attached, we'll actually see them jump off into the water. I imagine that for that person, that is probably one of the most exciting parts of their job. Definitely not something that I personally would look forward to. Something else that we also sometimes see with these night recoveries is due to the lights near the water, bugs will be attracted occasionally, as well as smaller fish. And so we might actually see some dolphins as we have in the past. Sometimes they come out because the hunting is maybe a little easier with them attracted to the water surface. with all this, the light. Obviously, we need lots of light to ensure safe operations as we're progressing through these recovery steps.
So you can see one of the rigging equipment was thrown to the fast boat, now attached to Dragon. Again, this is on a hydraulic lift that will safely lift a Dragon capsule out of the water and onto that disc you see at the bottom of your screen. The recovery forces here have trained time and time again for this operation, have a good sense of what to do in this particular scenario. This is one of the better case scenarios for Dragon. We talked about it landing in a stable 1 configuration. That would be lifting the capsule off when it's upright. There are different configurations that the crews are trained to accommodate.
As we mentioned before, the Dragon capsule is soon to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. It will then, once it's in the Dragon's nest there that we can see on screen, it'll be pulled forward to the recovery platform, which is currently off screen, but we'll get a view of that later on whenever Dragon is in place. The crew will egress. They will...
Dragon, SpaceX, forward link transition complete. Com check.
SpaceX Dragon, have you line clear?
Glad to hear from you. An update, the recovery vessel is backing up to the ship now, maybe 50 meters away, and looking for your go to come on board with internal cameras.
SpaceX Dragon, come on board.
Copy.
At this point in time, rough estimation for crew egress is anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how additional safety checks pan out and how quickly we can get the team, the capsule onto the recovery vessel that you see there. Those teams are now preparing to lower that hydraulic lift mechanism into the water. That will then bring the spacecraft onto the deck into that translation system known as the nest. The capsule will remain there during crew extraction as well as throughout the journey back to port.
So one of the lines of the hydraulic lift has now been thrown to the rigger. The hydraulic lift is now moving into position, moving forward. This is the position that allows the initial lift of the Dragon capsule out of the Atlantic Ocean and then onto the Dragon nest.
Dragon, SpaceX rigging complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We'll be waiting.
So the clock starts now at 9:48 p.m. Pacific time, 12:48 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be looking for Dragon to be lifted out of the water at approximately 9:53 p.m. Pacific, 12:53 a.m. Eastern.
right before the Dragon capsule is lifted out of the water, we'll see that recovery team member who is currently still standing there. He's actually standing in the bucket where the main parachutes were located during Dragon's flight. Obviously, those buckets are that bucket is now empty as we deployed the main parachutes. But we will see that team member jump off and away from the capsule just prior to the capsule being lifted out of the water.
Dragon, brace for capsule lift.
There they go.
We mentioned a couple of times the recovery team's familiarity with these operations and able to move a little bit quicker. They prepped the crew for about 5 minutes of capsule lift. That happened in just a couple of minutes.
And it looks like we are starting to see the capsule be lifted out of the water. We can now start to see the heat shield. Dragon now in the air, the hydraulic lift being activated and will be utilized to center Dragon on the nest there at the aft end of the vessel. I love this view because you can see the state of the heat shield. It did such incredible work during atmospheric re-entry. Dragon Endeavour now placed into the nest of our recovery vessel, Megan. Here's our first view inside the Dragon capsule after they made their splashdown. I was just doing some quick math. We had splashdown at 9:17 p.m. Pacific. It's now 9:51, so just 34 minutes. That's like a pretty efficient recovery operation indeed.
See the cabin lights on the inside the Dragon are off as the crew patiently waits for the recovery forces to do their job and get them out of the water and, of course, ready for egress.
Dragon, I'm happy to see you safe and sound on board. Personnel are completing their final checks. Stand by for translation across the deck to the egress platform.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We'll be waiting.
And that translation that was mentioned is a physical movement of the Dragon nest, the view you're seeing now. The capsule itself will be moved further inwards into the recovery vessel, where there is a platform waiting. And you can sort of see in the middle of your view of Dragon, there is that nice square feature. That is the side hatch. When the Dragon nest moves into the recovery vessel towards that platform, it allows the recovery teams that are on that platform to perform the operations of opening the hatch. The teams you've seen so far have been responsible for the rigging and the operation of the hydraulic lift to bring the Dragon capsule onto the Dragon nest. Now they'll hand it over to the teams that will get the Crew-6 astronaut and cosmonaut safely out of the capsule.
Yeah, it's important to note that all 4 crew members will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while they exit the capsule. You know, it's the same process for any returning crew from a long duration mission. And it makes sense because returning to, you know, our environment here with gravity can really wreak havoc on our bodily systems and especially those that are responsible for balance and control. So we will be providing assistance, but I'm sure we will be seeing smiles and thumbs up along the way.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons. Of course, we've been talking a lot about the operations, but really we should mention the science Of course, the reason the Dragon is returning from space is because their mission, the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonauts, was a 6-month expedition on board the International Space Station, an orbiting laboratory for science, maintenance, technology demonstrations. It's the lab that allows gravity to be taken out of the equation, and you can find some new and interesting things about many different parts of science: physical science, biological sciences, and of course human sciences. You can learn a lot about the human body, and that's very necessary for learning how humans adapt to space and, of course, returning from space to a one-gravity environment. Very necessary for understanding how to send humans further into the solar system, to the moon and to Mars.
So we're now standing by for translation of the Dragon capsule to the recovery platform. Basically meaning that once everything checks out here, we should see the entire capsule move towards us. We'll get a different camera view on board the recovery vessel once the Dragon capsule starts to move, but it'll basically put it right up next to the platform that is basically right at the same height as the bottom of the side hatch. Oh, there we have our first movement of Dragon Endeavour making its way to that recovery platform.
Dragon, I'm noticing the cabin lights are off. I'm wondering if you had them off specifically for re-entry.
SpaceX Dragon, we did, and you turned them on us. We were enjoying the nice calm lighting. What do you turn it back on again? Good. We're enjoying the light. We have to see what's going on outside this way.
No worries on the lighting. Fine with the lights off. I imagine your re-entry was pretty amazing. Side hatch opening should be any minute now, and I think that's about it for me working with you all tonight. It's great to see you back. Steve, Woody, Sultan, Andrey, happy to have you back home safe.
And we're happy to be back, and we look forward to catching up with you again real soon. Take care.
It's an important note. The crew has the ability to toggle lights on and off, and turning them off during the re-entry phase. There are those windows that we've been seeing.
All right, Dragon, I know I said goodbye. I'm back, and I'm wondering if you can indeed turn the cabin lights on for the recovery team to come inside.
Absolutely, we'll take care of that. And they're on now.
So we'll be seeing those lights turn on here momentarily, but again, they've been off in this configuration, so if you're trying to imagine what the crew was experiencing during re-entry, it was with the darkness, but there are those windows on the Dragon itself, and through the plasma buildup, they were able to see some of the plasma come through the windows and really get to experience the full experience that is re-entering from space into the Earth's atmosphere, and just sit back and relax and enjoy it.
Yeah, that also makes sense given that it is dark out, and you know, for them to be able to, where possible, see the recovery operations happening outside. Yeah, same reason why you know, as kids we're not allowed to turn lights on in the car when mom and dad are driving at night because you can't see very well outside. So that makes a lot of sense. But we did ask them to turn them back on just so that we're able to help the crew egress. And once the side hatch is open, the flight surgeon will be the first person to poke their head in and just do a quick thumbs up scan of all 4 crew members to make sure everything is good. But what we're doing right now on the outside of the capsule, we're doing additional safety checks. We saw momentarily some of the recovery team, they had face masks on. This is personal protective equipment, or PPE. It's basically a respirator to allow them to breathe clean air. They're just going to do some additional sniff tests for any lingering hypergol vapors. Once again, the onboard propellants that we use, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine, are toxic if you know, we come into contact with them or we breathe those vapors. So just that, once again, ensuring full safety for the recovery team on board, as well as the crew as we prepare to open that side hatch. We want to make sure that none of those vapors are lingering.
Side hatch, if we get these views from the inside, we'll also be able to alternate from the outside, is now open. You see the recovery team is open and waving to the crew. First humans that the Crew-6 has seen on the ground in 6 months.
Looks like we got some fist bump action, thumbs up. Seems like the crew is in pretty good spirits after their journey back home.
We're not getting audio, but I am getting reports that on the recovery ship there was a big round of applause from all the recovery team on recovery vessel Megan as soon as that side hatch opened for the crew, congratulating them on a successful mission and successful return home.
So once again, this is the first time that the side hatch has been opened since the day that the crew lifted off from pad 39A. This side hatch is not utilized while they are on station. We use the forward hatch, or the hatch located at the top of the Dragon capsule, for ingress and egress to the space station. So this is the first time that the side hatch is open, and like you said, Gary, their first breath of fresh air since their departure. So we'll also see the SpaceX recovery team, perhaps they already installed it, but I think they did. It's a protective casing around the side hatch. As we mentioned before, we do reuse these capsules. This is actually the 4th flight for this particular capsule, so to help make sure that we protect the hardware as well as the spacesuits themselves, we want to make sure that that side hatch has a little bit of protection. So there's a small piece that they put around the edge to help protect it. Looks like we're getting some initial photos of the crew's return while continuing to secure that side hatch. Make sure it stays in the upright position while the crew is making their way out. Again, we will be providing assistance to all 4 crew members as they egress, as returning to our 1G environment, our 1 gravity environment here on Earth can be difficult after spending so many months in space. Once again, this crew lifted off in very early March, so they've certainly been enjoying microgravity for a while.
It's important to note all the team members it takes to perform a successful recovery operations. We have specialized personnel out to drive the fast boats and secure rigging equipment, operate the hydraulic lift to bring Dragon onto the Dragon's nest and move it into position. Now we have specialists that are dedicated to understanding the Dragon's systems, successfully opening up the side hatch and knowing the insides of the Dragon vehicle to basically unbuckle the 4 crew members from the vehicle and start bringing them out one at a time. We, of course, have medical personnel on board, with medical facilities on board as well, to provide standard checks and test the health of the crew, make sure they're feeling good. And then, of course, Kate, you mentioned there is a helipad on the recovery vessel itself and a helicopter stage. So after the initial medical checks, the crew will be able to get a very quick ride home to the Florida coast, where they'll hop on a plane and make their way back over to Houston for further testing and, of course, to see their families, who will be eagerly awaiting their arrival. It's important to note that Stephen, Woody, Sultan, Andrey will be getting assistance from these recovery teams while exiting the capsule. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to the gravity environment can be a big toll on the vestibular system, responsible for maintaining balance and motion. So safety, again, is our #1 priority with this operation. You'll see the crew members helped out of the capsule one by one and assisted the few feet to the medical quarters on aboard the boat. If you've ever watched crews return on a Soyuz, this is the same process when astronauts are carried from the capsule to waiting chairs and then carried to waiting medical tents. This is also a period where any time critical cargo can be recovered from the spacecraft. They're positioned right underneath the crew members, and they can be brought back into port relatively quickly. Once the ship and capsule return to shore, the recovery team will perform additional inspections before loading Dragon onto a flatbed truck at the SpaceX facility in Cape Canaveral for post-processing.
As part of the effort to make sure that there's a bit more room for crew egress within the capsule, we are currently detaching and removing the footrests that we saw attached to each of the 4 seats inside Dragon. This just helps to create a little bit more space and enable the crew to get out a little bit easier. We'll also likely see them put a small slide up against the side hatch, and that will allow the crew to kind of slide out a little bit to egress a bit easier. Yep, there's that slide.
It's like they've done this before.
Yeah, we've done it just a few times. We're now standing by for egress of the Crew-6 team. Very happy to see Steve, Woody, Andrey, and Sultan back on planet Earth. I'm sure they are also excited to come out, and as you mentioned, it's after the medical checks, they'll hop in the helicopter and go home, a quick ride. So I bet they're all getting really excited for the opportunity to see their families really soon.
And of course, the change of gravity from microgravity to 1G can be taxing on the body. So throughout that whole process, through the medical checks, through the helicopter ride, the plane ride, the crew will have facilities and will have the ability to rest through much of that journey. As, of course, this has been a taxing journey for them, and they'll have well-deserved rest along their journey back home to Houston.
It varies mission to mission, crew by crew, but we usually see either the pilot or the commander egress first. So with this view here, Commander Steve Bowen is in that left seat, and pilot Woody Hoburg is in the seat on the right. To Woody's right is Andrey Fedyaev, and to Steve's left is Sultan Alneyadi. So usually it makes it easier if the center seats are vacated prior to the 2 mission specialist seats, but it really varies crew to crew. We did see them detach and remove the footrests from all 4 seats to also help add a bit more moving room within the interior of the capsule.
There's a series of checks, so it's not as easy as just unbuckling and getting out of your seat. The seats, of course, and suits are designed with human spaceflight in mind. So the seats are connected. The suits are connected to the seats via umbilical that can provide communications as well as air, nitrox purge that the crew is able to breathe. It's a little bit more oxygen than your standard breathing air. And so there is some technical specifics to get them egressed. So it is quite a process. So we're just standing by for them to get out of their seats. Does look like Steve will be the first out. NASA astronaut Steve Bowen, the first to exit the Dragon spacecraft.
I think I see a big smile on his face.
Helped up by the recovery teams.
Now being seated in a rolling chair to help move him back to the medical bay, where he will get a quick checkout with the flight surgeon.
And again, this is standard procedure.
We can see some applause happening on deck. Looks like our pilot, Woody Hoburg, will be the next to egress. For those of you that have just joined us, we are now standing by for egress of the remaining 3 Crew-6 members. We can now see Woody Hoburg making his way, pilot of Crew-6, making his way down the slide. Looks like some excitement, possibly some more applause happening off camera. Remaining inside are mission specialists Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev. Commander Steve Bowen has already egressed. Some more applause there on the deck of the recovery vessel. Dragon splashed down just under an hour ago at 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern. So just under an hour ago, they made contact with the ocean surface, and here we see them now egressing and beginning the last steps before being able to make their way home.
That's right. The 2 NASA astronauts have exited the Dragon spacecraft and are now in the medical facilities as part of the standard procedures and checks necessary before they board the helicopters and take the flight back to shore. Of course, there are the 2 mission specialists left in the capsule. If they follow standard procedure, it should be Andrey Fedyaev that we see egress the capsule next.
Gary, you mentioned standard procedure. I think that's an important thing to note, that in addition to the teams rehearsing both joint operations, everywhere from pre-flight training to the things that they were doing in space to the things that they were monitoring while Dragon was on orbit and making its way home, everything is very carefully choreographed in terms of the process in which we execute these operations. So even from a recovery standpoint, you mentioned before that our recovery times from the first time we did this with humans on Demo 2, again using this same capsule. This capsule has flown 4 times now. Our operations have gotten more efficient, and they are documented step by step. And so of course, whenever it comes to egress, there is a little bit of flexibility that if a crew member needs or wants to egress sooner than later, we can do that. But generally, as I mentioned before, we do try to vacate the 2 center seats first. We can now see 2 more leg rests being removed footrests being removed from the seats inside the capsule, again, just to create a little bit more room.
Yeah, you mentioned the efficiencies, Kate. We're inside of an hour now, and this is from the moment of splashdown at 12:17 p.m. Eastern. It's now 1:14, or 12:17 a.m. Eastern, rather. So it's now 1:14 a.m. Eastern, and we're seeing the 3rd crew member egress. So we're just an hour, really, after splashing down that the crew is able to set foot on the recovery vessel. There's Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev being assisted by the recovery teams onto the rolling chair. He'll also be positioned over to the medical facilities. Last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour now is Emirati astronaut Sultan Alneyadi, completing 186 days in space.
Got some happy waves there from Andrey. More applause. And the last footrest being detached from Sultan Alneyadi's chair.
You can see SpaceX and Emirati recovery personnel positioned outside the Dragon capsule, ready to receive Sultan Alneyadi. Again, he is the last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour.
And if he makes it out in the next minute, which it looks like he is, it will be exactly 1 hour on the dot after making splashdown.
Not bad.
60 minutes exactly. So once again, nominal operations are to assist all crew members to the medical bay. The return to gravity can be pretty jarring on the human body. So we slide them down a little Dragon fun slide, assist them into the wheeled chair, and roll them over to the medical bay. And just like that, the 4th crew member, 1 hour exactly on the nose since splashdown, has now egressed from Dragon Endeavour. Looks like smiles and waves and applause all around.
All right. All 4 crew members have egressed Dragon successfully. So now that Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical teams and, of course, the international teams, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. This all kicked off on March 2nd, 2023 from historic Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey made a 25-hour flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. Since arriving at the station, they spent nearly 6 months as members of Expedition 68 and 69, executing science experiments, spacewalks, and repairs while aboard the orbiting laboratory. Actually, more than 6 months.
That's right. And their journey home began about 18 hours ago on September 3rd, when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 4:05 p.m. Pacific time. Then, after 5 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the 16-minute-long deorbit burn, at 8:24 p.m. Pacific time, 3:24 GMT, and that is what put Dragon on its path home to Earth. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes, followed by 4 main parachutes, and with final splashdown occurring off the coast of Florida near Jacksonville at 9:17 p.m. Pacific time, 4:17 GMT. Following that successful splashdown, we saw the SpaceX recovery experts move in really quickly and prepare Dragon Endeavour for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just almost exactly an hour following splashdown, we saw Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
So after the medical facilities and medical checks, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore where they'll transfer to the aircraft that will take them home. Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, and later Andrey will fly back to Russia and Sultan to the UAE. They'll be reunited with families to bring an end to the mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue in this new era of human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover that we just executed after successfully launching the Crew-7 mission to the space station just a little over a week ago. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share this mission with the public. All the teams from SpaceX and NASA continue to work hard to keep America leading the world in human spaceflight. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey on social media as they travel back home. We also have a post-splashdown media telecon coming up at approximately 11 p.m. Pacific, 2 a.m. Eastern, where leadership from NASA, the UAE, SpaceX will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So we'll say thank you one more time for tuning in and cheering on Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey as they made their return back to planet Earth. From all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew-6. So long.